The large house sat quietly at the end of a long private road, hidden behind tall gates and old trees. From the outside, it looked perfect, strong, and calm. But inside, the silence felt heavy. It was the kind of silence that came from unspoken pain, not peace. The man who owned the house had built his life from nothing. Years ago, he worked day and night, taking risks others were afraid to take. Slowly, his name became known in business circles. Money followed, then respect, then power. But none of that mattered much anymore when he walked through his own home. His young son lived in that house too. The boy had been born healthy, but an illness during his early years changed everything. He could not walk properly and struggled to speak. Some days, he barely reacted to the world around him. Doctors tried their best, therapists came and went, but progress was slow and uncertain. The man loved his son deeply, yet he felt helpless. No amount of money could fix what truly hurt. The house was always clean and well managed. Staff moved quietly, careful not to disturb the boy. Among them was a woman who worked as a maid. She was honest, hardworking, and never complained. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise and left after sunset. Life had not been kind to her, but she carried herself with dignity. She had a young daughter still in school. Because she could not afford childcare, she often brought her daughter along after classes. The girl would sit in a corner with her books, doing homework while her mother worked. She was polite, quiet, and observant. Most people in the house barely noticed her. The man noticed many things in his business life, but at home, he often looked past people. His focus was always on his son, on meetings, on phone calls. The staff were simply part of the background. That is how it had always been. One afternoon, the house felt heavier than usual. The boy had refused to eat since morning. His caregiver tried again and again, but he turned his face away. The man watched from a distance, frustration building inside him. Finally, he asked everyone to leave the room. He needed a moment alone to calm himself. Later that day, as he walked through the hallway toward his office, he heard soft voices coming from his son's room. He stopped. The voices were gentle, not rushed. Curious, he stood still near the door, unseen. Inside the room, he saw something unexpected. The maid's daughter was sitting beside his son. She held a small spoon and spoke softly, almost like a lullaby. She was not forcing him. She smiled, waited patiently, and wiped his mouth when he spilled food. There was no fear in her eyes, no pressure in her movements. The boy looked at her. It was not a big movement, but it was real. His eyes followed her hand. Slowly, he opened his mouth. The girl smiled wider, careful not to show excitement that might scare him. She fed him another spoon, then another. The man felt his chest tighten. He had not seen his son eat this calmly in weeks. He stayed there, watching silently. The girl talked about simple things. She told him about school, about a bird she saw on the way, about her favorite subject. She spoke to him like he understood every word. And maybe, in his own way, he did. The boy made a small sound, almost a laugh. It was faint, but it was there. The man felt something break inside him. Not pain, but release. He turned away quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. He went back to his office, but he could not focus. His mind replayed what he had seen again and again. That evening, he asked the maid to come to his office. She walked in nervously, afraid she had done something wrong. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood before him. He asked her about her daughter, where she studied, how her grades were, what she wanted to become someday. The maid answered honestly, surprised by his interest. She spoke about struggles, about trying her best, about teaching her daughter kindness and patience. He nodded quietly, listening more than speaking. That night he could not sleep. For years, he believed that professionals, machines, and money were the only answers. But what he saw that day was different. It was human. It was simple. And it worked. The next morning, he made a decision. He asked that the girl be allowed to spend short supervised time with his son during afternoons. Not as a duty, but as a presence. He did not explain much. He only said it felt right. The maid was unsure at first, worried about crossing boundaries. but he assured her that nothing bad would come of it. As days passed, small changes began to appear. The boy seemed calmer. He ate a little better. His eyes followed movement more often. Doctors said not to expect miracles, but they could not deny improvement. The girl remained the same. She did her homework, helped when allowed, and never asked for anything. She treated the boy like a friend, not a burden. The man watched all this quietly. For the first time in a long while, hope entered his home. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and warm. He did not know yet that this simple moment would change more than just his son's life. But deep inside, he felt that something important had begun. The days after that quiet afternoon began to feel different inside the house. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same routines continued, the same staff moved through the halls, and the same silence filled the rooms. But something unseen had shifted. Every afternoon after school, the maid's daughter sat near the boy with permission. A caregiver stayed nearby watching carefully. At first, the girl felt nervous. She kept her hands close, unsure how much she was allowed to do. But the boy seemed to recognize her. His eyes followed her when she entered the room. That alone surprised everyone. She started with simple things. She talked softly, the way she would talk to a younger cousin. She showed him pictures from her school books. Sometimes she just sat quietly beside him, letting the moment breathe. She never forced a response. She waited. The boy responded in small ways. His fingers twitched when she spoke. His breathing slowed. On some days, he accepted food more easily when she was there. The caregivers noticed. They shared careful smiles but said nothing out loud. The man watched from a distance. He never entered the room while she was there. He did not want to disturb the fragile calm. He stayed behind doors, in hallways, or watched through security screens. Each small reaction from his son felt like a quiet victory. At night, he found himself thinking about the girl. About how natural she seemed around his son. About how little she expected in return. He began to question many things he once believed. He had spent years trusting systems and experts, yet kindness had done what none of them could. One evening, he asked the maid to stay a little longer. She stood across from him, tired from the long day. He asked how her daughter felt spending time in the house. The maid answered honestly. She said her daughter was happy but also careful. She knew her place and did not want to cause trouble. That answer stayed with him. The next week, a doctor visited for a routine check. The man mentioned the small changes he had noticed. The doctor listened closely, watching the boy interact with the girl from across the room. He said there was no medical explanation yet, but emotional comfort could never be ignored. That gave the man hope he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Meanwhile, the girl faced struggles of her own. School was not easy. She studied hard, but books were expensive, and sometimes she stayed up late helping her mother with chores. She never spoke about these things in the house. She carried them quietly. One afternoon, while sitting with the boy, she noticed his hands shaking slightly. She placed her small hand over his, gently, without thinking. The shaking slowed. The caregiver watched closely, ready to step in, but the moment passed peacefully. The man saw this through the screen. His eyes filled, but he did not wipe the tears away. Later that day, he asked the head caregiver a question he had never asked before. He wanted to know how his son felt emotionally. Not medically, emotionally. The caregiver paused, surprised, then admitted that loneliness often slowed progress more than illness. That night, the man stayed beside his son longer than usual. He spoke softly, unsure if the boy could understand. He apologized for being distant. He promised to try harder. The next day, the maid received a call from her daughter's school. Fees were overdue. The maid felt her chest tighten. She had already borrowed money once. She did not know what to do. She did not tell anyone at work. She smiled as usual and continued her tasks. But the man noticed something was wrong. The maid seemed distracted. Her movements slower. That evening, he gently asked if everything was okay. The question caught her off guard. After hesitation, she spoke the truth. He listened without interruption. He did not offer money right away. Instead, he asked about the girl's dreams, what she wanted to become. The maid smiled faintly and said her daughter wanted to study and help others someday. The man nodded. He told her not to worry for now. Over the following days, the girl continued spending time with the boy. Their bond grew stronger. He responded more often to her voice. Once, he even tried to move his hand toward her. Doctors called it progress. The man called it a miracle built from patience. He quietly arranged for the girl's school fees to be handled through a foundation, without names or attention. He made sure it would not embarrass the maid. No one spoke of it. The maid only knew that help had arrived at the right time. As weeks passed, the house felt warmer. Laughter appeared in small pieces. The boy smiled more often. The man felt lighter, less burdened by guilt. Still, he knew this was only the beginning. Change never came all at once. But for the first time, he believed it was possible. And it all started with a child who chose kindness without being asked. Time moved quietly, day after day, and the house slowly learned a new rhythm. The afternoons no longer felt heavy. There was a gentle routine now, one that did not come from schedules or instructions, but from comfort. The girl arrived after school like always. She placed her bag neatly in the corner and washed her hands before sitting near the boy. She spoke to him about her classes, about small problems she faced, and about little joys she found in ordinary days. She never spoke louder than needed. She never rushed him. The boy began to expect her presence. When she was late one afternoon because of rain, he grew restless. His breathing changed and he refused food again. The caregivers tried to calm him, but it did not work. When the girl finally entered, wet shoes and all, his body relaxed. Everyone noticed. The man noticed too. He started changing his own routine. Meetings were shortened. Phone calls were delayed. He wanted to be closer, not only to observe but to understand. He began sitting in the room during some afternoons, keeping distance but staying present. One day, the girl noticed him sitting there. She felt shy and stopped speaking for a moment. He smiled gently and told her to continue as usual. His voice was calm, different from the firm tone people feared in business meetings. That day, he saw something new. The girl asked the boy simple questions and waited patiently for any response. Sometimes, his response was just a blink or a small sound. She celebrated those moments quietly, as if they mattered more than words. And they did. Doctors continued their visits. Charts showed slight improvements. Muscle response was better. Eye focus lasted longer. The professionals used careful language, but hope was clearly growing. The man thanked them politely, but in his heart, he already knew the source of change. Outside the house, life was not as gentle for the girl and her mother. Prices were rising. The maid worried constantly. She hid her fears behind a tired smile. She did not want to depend on kindness. She wanted to earn every breath she took. One evening, the girl returned home quieter than usual. A classmate had mocked her worn shoes. She did not cry. She had learned early that tears did not fix much. She focused on her homework instead. The next day, while sitting with the boy, she was quieter. The man noticed. He asked her gently if something was wrong. She hesitated, then shook her head and smiled. He did not push. Later, he spoke to the maid. She admitted the struggles but begged him not to treat them differently. She feared pity more than hardship. Her words stayed with him. That night, he remembered his own childhood. The long hours. The feeling of being unseen. The hunger that was not always about food. He realized how much he had forgotten. The next week, he made changes that no one announced. The maid's work hours were adjusted to reduce strain. Transportation support quietly appeared. No favors were spoken aloud. The girl noticed small differences. Life felt slightly lighter. She did not question it. Meanwhile, the boy reached a new milestone. One afternoon, while the girl was reading aloud, he moved his fingers toward the page. It was slow and unsteady, but it was intentional. The room froze. The caregiver held her breath. The girl paused, then gently guided his hand to the picture. He touched it. The man felt his knees weaken. He sat down without realizing it. Tears came freely this time. From that day on, progress felt more real. The boy tried more often. He responded to the girl's voice with sounds that were becoming clearer. Therapists adjusted their plans, encouraged by what they saw. The house staff began speaking more warmly. The silence that once pressed down now felt softer. But change often brings fear with hope. A relative visited one weekend. He noticed the girl's presence and questioned it openly. He suggested boundaries, rules, and distance. He spoke in cold logic, not understanding what lived between the boy and the girl. The man listened quietly. For the first time, he disagreed without raising his voice. He said the house had learned something important, and he would not ignore it. That conversation marked a shift. He was no longer hiding his heart. The girl sensed tension but did not understand it. She only knew that when she held the boy's hand, he felt calmer. That was enough for her. One afternoon, she brought a small drawing she had made at school. It showed two figures sitting side by side under a tree. She placed it near the boy's bed. He stared at it for a long time. The man watched from the doorway, understanding something deep and simple. Healing was not only about the body. It was about being seen. As weeks passed, the man began thinking about the future. About education. About responsibility. About doing more without taking dignity away. He knew that real change required patience, just like the girl had shown his son. And in that quiet understanding, part 3 of their shared journey continued, built not on grand gestures, but on steady care and trust. The house had learned to breathe again, but life outside its walls did not slow down. Trouble has a way of arriving quietly without warning, and when it came, it tested everyone. One morning, the maid arrived later than usual. Her face looked pale, and her hands shook as she cleaned. The girl followed silently, holding her school bag close. Something felt wrong. The man noticed. He always noticed now. That afternoon, while the girl sat with the boy, her mind was elsewhere. She spoke less. Her smiles were smaller. The boy sensed it. He reached out, touching her sleeve, a small gesture that stopped her thoughts. She looked at him and smiled again, but her eyes were tired. Later that evening, the maid finally spoke. Her landlord had given her notice. The rent had increased beyond what she could pay. She had 2 weeks to leave. She did not ask for help. She only informed him because she might need time off to search for another place. The man listened quietly. He felt the familiar urge to fix everything instantly, but he held back. He understood now that dignity mattered as much as solutions. He told her to take the time she needed. That night, he walked through the house alone. He passed rooms filled with expensive furniture and empty silence. He thought of the small apartment the maid and her daughter lived in. He thought of the girl's calm voice, her patience, her strength. He realized something important. He had already allowed this child to change his son's life. It was time to allow himself to change hers. Carefully, respectfully. The next day, he spoke with someone he trusted. Not lawyers or business partners, but people who understood people. Plans were made quietly. Meanwhile, the girl's school life became heavier. Exams were approaching. Stress followed her everywhere. Still, every afternoon, she showed up, ready to sit beside the boy. She never complained. She never asked why life was harder for her than others. One afternoon, the boy surprised everyone again. While the girl was helping him eat, he made a clear sound. It was not a word, but it carried meaning. The caregiver froze. The girl leaned closer, her eyes wide. The man rushed in without thinking. He knelt beside his son, tears filling his eyes. For the first time, he did not care who saw. Doctors later called it a breakthrough. Hope filled the house, but the maid's crisis remained. The deadline approached quickly. One evening, the man asked the maid and her daughter to sit with him. They looked nervous. The maid feared bad news. The girl sat quietly, hands folded. He spoke gently. He said he knew about the housing problem. He said he wanted to help, but only in a way they were comfortable with. He offered a solution. A small apartment owned by one of his companies, close to the girls' school. Rent would be fair, written clearly, with no hidden favors. The maid would continue working as before. No conditions attached. The maid's eyes filled with tears. She tried to refuse at first, afraid of dependency. But he assured her this was not charity. It was stability. She agreed. The girl looked confused, then relieved. That night, she slept without fear for the first time in weeks. As days passed, the move happened quietly. No one spoke of it in the house. Life continued, but lighter. The boy continued improving. His sessions grew longer. His attention stronger. The girl remained by his side, steady as ever. But change also brought whispers. Some staff wondered why rules were bending, why lines were blurring. The man heard these whispers and addressed them calmly. He explained that compassion was not weakness. It was leadership that silenced most doubts. One afternoon, the girl missed a day. The boy grew restless again. The man felt fear return. When the girl came the next day, he asked if she was all right. She explained that she had been sick. Nothing serious. She apologized. He realized then how much the house now depended on her presence. He began thinking ahead. What would happen when she grew older? When school demands increased? When life pulled her away? That thought scared him. He spoke with specialists about emotional bonds and transitions. He wanted to make sure his son would not feel abandoned. Care plans changed. New support systems were added. The girl remained important, but not the only source of comfort. Balance returned. One evening, the boy reached out and held the man's hand for the first time in a way that felt intentional. The man laughed through tears. The girl watched quietly, smiling. In that moment, the man understood something deeply. Helping one person did not take love away from another. It multiplied it. As part 4 closed, everyone stood at a crossroads. The past had loosened its grip, but the future demanded courage. And courage, he had learned, often looked like kindness done the right way. The future did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, in quiet mornings and patient afternoons, in small choices that added up over time. By now, the house no longer felt like a place frozen in fear. Felt lived in. The boy continued to surprise everyone. His progress was still slow, but it was steady. He responded to voices more clearly. He showed preference, turning his head toward sounds he liked. He laughed more often, short bursts that filled the room with light. The man stopped counting achievements the way doctors did. He learned to value moments instead. A smile, calm breath, a hand resting without shaking. The girl remained a constant presence, but her role changed gently. She was no longer the only source of comfort. Therapists and caregivers worked closely with her, learning from her patience and copying her calm tone. What once felt fragile now felt supported. At school, the girl began to shine. With stable housing and fewer worries, she focused better. Her teachers noticed. One of them encouraged her to apply for a small academic program. She hesitated at first, afraid of failing. But the man quietly supported the application through the same foundation that had helped with her fees. She was accepted. The news filled her mother with pride and fear at the same time. She worried about changes, about losing balance. But the man reassured her. Growth did not mean separation. It meant preparation. As months passed, the girl's schedule grew busier. Some afternoons she arrived later. Some days she could not come at all. The boy adjusted better than expected. The care plans worked. The bond remained, but it no longer carried fear. One afternoon, the girl sat beside the boy and told him she might not be able to come every day in the future. She spoke softly, choosing her words carefully. The boy listened. He did not cry. He reached out and touched her hand. The man watched quietly, proud of both of them. He had changed too. The man who once ruled through distance now chose presence. He spent more time at home. He spoke more openly. Staff felt seen. The house felt warmer not because of wealth but because of care. One evening, he invited the maid and her daughter to share a simple meal. No formality, no titles, just food and conversation. They talked about school, weather, and small dreams. Nothing extraordinary, everything important. The boy sat nearby, calm and observant. He listened more than anyone realized. Later that night, the man stood alone by the window. He thought about the moment that started everything. A child feeding another child. No cameras. No applause. Just kindness. He understood now that power meant nothing without humanity. Years passed quietly. The girl grew older. She studied hard. She returned to the house during holidays, always visiting the boy. Their bond remained gentle and respectful, shaped by gratitude rather than need. The boy continued to grow in his own way. He never became what the world might call normal, but he became happy. And that was enough. The maid remained employed, respected, and secure. She never forgot where she came from, and she never let comfort change her values. The man often spoke privately about what changed him. He did not mention money or medicine. He spoke about noticing people, about listening, about letting kindness lead. He created programs that focused on dignity, not charity. He never used his story for praise. Some things were meant to remain quiet. One afternoon, long after the girl had grown, the man sat beside his son and held his hand. The boy squeezed back. That single moment meant more than all his success. What happened next did not change just one life. It changed many. And it all began with a simple act that proved love does not need permission to heal.